Now it's time for your questions answered, and today we're looking at your questions about the science and reasoning behind some of the restrictions that are being proposed in England after the 2nd of December, and indeed how things might look around the four nations. We're joined by Professor Sian Griffiths, epidemic specialist and epidemiologist at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Dr. Bharat Pankhania, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter and an expert in communicable diseases. Thank you both very much for joining us today to answer the questions. And, you know, there are still, I guess it's fair to say, quite a few blanks to be filled in as the governments decide exactly what to do and respond to the latest virus figures. But we will do our best to answer the viewers' questions as ever. The first question we have is from Mark in Bexleyheath. And he asks, is there any scientific evidence that explains it's safe to have a 5-day restriction relief over Christmas? The vulnerable are anxious, says Mark. Sian, I'll put that one to you first of all.
Thank you. Well, Mark, no, this is not a matter of science. This is a matter of politics or cultural belief, because Christmas in some calendars is just another 5 days. And but I think the general feeling is that as a nation, we all take a break at Christmas and we all need a break. So it's not the science that's driving the Christmas break. It's the politics, it's the cultural need to have a break from the relentlessness of this viral infection. So that's why we keep saying, really, this is not going to be a usual Christmas. It's not going to be a wild Christmas. It's going to be a Christmas where we may be able to see a few of our close family if we choose to do so.
And Bharat, clearly scientists and indeed politicians want people to be careful. But do you think in reality, when we look at people's behaviour, that is what, everyone is going to be? And what advice would you therefore give to anyone who is vulnerable and anxious about how they should protect themselves over the Christmas period?
I think they should be aware of vulnerable people in their network that they may be meeting up with. And if they are meeting up with vulnerable people, then before they get together on December the 25th or thereabouts, at least keep clear of parties and going out 3 weeks beforehand, at least 3 weeks, so that you're giving yourself a good margin, and then check that you are actually fit and well and got no signs and symptoms, and hope for the best. Really, the best strategy is keep it low profile, don't get infected, don't infect others. Vaccines are almost around the corner. Invest in the pain of 2020, because 2021 will pay you good dividends.
I hope, Mark, that answers your question or helps give you some guidance. The next question is from Owen in Hove. A little bit of crystal ball gazing, but hopefully a bit of science here as well in the answer to this. Can you tell me if London will go into Tier 3 restrictions after lockdown? Asks Owen. So, Sian, based on what we know already about figures in the London area, what do you think is going to happen there?
As you say, crystal ball gazing, because different parts of London have different rates. We're told that the tiers, which will be announced on Thursday, which tier you go into will be based on the rates of disease. Are the rates increasing? What's the positivity? So for every, how many positives are found, what percentage of tests done are positive, because that's an important factor. That helps to calculate the R number. Other factors will include how stretched the NHS is and how well it's coping with the rates of disease in the local area. What are the hospital admission rates? So all these factors will be put together, and then the tier decisions will be made. So this will be a matter of looking across the piece, and we understand that it'll probably be London-wide rather than a borough at a time, because boroughs, it's quite difficult in London to dissociate boroughs. And so there's quite strong feelings between places where the rates are lower and places where the rates are higher. So it'll be a decision made by the government at the end of the day based on that information.
OK, back to you now, Dr. Pankhania, for the next question. This is from Sophie in London, who asks, will new restrictions allow us to travel overseas to spend Christmas with family, as we do not have family bubbles of relatives in the UK? A very pertinent question today when we're talking so much about travel.
Yes, so of course you can travel abroad, but you need to be aware of risks. And the pinch points always are at the airport or whichever port that you're departing from, and then at the arrival's place, and then you're going into unknown territory abroad. Having said all that, then on your way back, you may be subject to restrictions and quarantine. We heard today that they are proposing that if you take a private test, you may be absolved from quarantine measures. I am not fully convinced about it. Therefore, I would say a good public health measure would be when you are returning, it is better to be in quarantine, especially if you're coming from a high incidence country.
Sian, you look as if you want to come in on that one.
I did want to come in on that because my reading of the regulations is that if you're in tier 3, you're not supposed to travel. So it will depend on the tier you're in. So in tier 3, you're not supposed to travel either abroad or within the country. And the other thing about
I'm just going to interrupt you there actually on that point because I was noticing Simon Calder actually has been tweeting about this today, someone who we interview a lot about travel stories. And he tweeted an hour ago, can a person in tier 3 legally go abroad from the 2nd of December? Last night, number 10 told me categorically no. But the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has just told the Today programme on the BBC, yes. So he said he was trying to find out. And then he subsequently tweeted 10 minutes ago, travelling abroad from England after lockdown will be legal, whichever tier you're in. Although for tier 3, the government says avoid travelling out of the area other than where necessary for work, education. But he's finally confirmed this is advice, not law.
Okay. So that advice has changed overnight.
This is evolving, I think is the right word to use, all the time.
Advice, actually, yes.
Yeah. And Bharat, I think you want to come back further on this particular point, which obviously a lot of people might be interested in.
This makes the point that it is so complicated, and I'm not surprised members of the public are anxious about what to do in our own country, leave alone going abroad, and also leave alone returning when you're coming back from other countries abroad.
Yeah, the next one then, Professor Griffiths, Sian, is from Alan in St Ives. On the subject of travel again, what is to stop people travelling from a tier 3 area to a lower tier to get around the restrictions? They could spread the virus.
Well, that's a sort of moral question, really, isn't it? If you're in a tier 3 area, you're in a tier 3 area, you know what restrictions you should apply to your life. You can get around it, but if you do, you risk spreading the disease further. So I think that's an individual decision that you can choose to make or not, depending upon how much you're abiding by the rules.
And presumably you'd be asking people to think very carefully, who are they going to see? Is it someone who's elderly, yes, someone who's vulnerable with an underlying health condition? Is it really worth the risk?
Really worth the risk to the other people, because you may be okay, but you may be asymptomatic, you may asymptomatically infected, and you could be taking the disease with you if you travel out of your area. So I think it is something we all have to decide for ourselves.
Yeah, Bharat, this from Jackie in Newbridge, who says, I live alone in Wales with family in England. With changes and varying restrictions between the two, can I still form a support bubble? Now, she's talking about a support bubble. Obviously, we're hearing that the 4 nations today are still in talks about some coordinated plans, or trying to get to a coordinated plan for the festive period. But Jackie here is talking about forming a support bubble between Wales and England.
It's not going to be easy because, again, it depends on what tiers her place of residence is compared to her support bubble and the distance to travel between the two places. So it's not that easy. There are imponderables, and only time will tell if she can honestly form a bubble, because how are you going to convince people that you're forming a bubble from your place in South Wales somewhere with another place in England which may potentially be in a tier 3 area?
So Jackie really needs to look out very carefully then for the latest advice from both governments. Yes. Sharon in Northampton, Sian, asks, is the government still planning to test university students and send them home at the start of December? Now, obviously, the government doesn't want masses of people on the move within a few days of one another. So this would be one way of getting significant numbers of people, students, hopefully home for the break.
Yes, there's a what's called a travel corridor that has been suggested that the universities stick to, and so testing is available for students from the 30th of November for a week. If you test negative, you're free to go home. If you test positive, you obviously need to wait 2 weeks and then go home. And this is an attempt to, as you say, space out the travelling home over Christmas. Many students will want to go home, and the universities have all been in discussion with government, with the test and trace system, and there are lots of different arrangements within different universities which assure us or ensure that you can get enough testing. So I think that yes, students will be going home, and they have option to be tested first before they go.
OK, and we have time just for one more question. This one is anonymous. It asks, pubs won't be allowed to open in Tier 3 areas, but households may be allowed to mix at Christmas. Why? And Bharat, I'll point that one towards you.
It's a public health measure. The assumption is that the pub will generate more cases compared to a smaller number in a household. Having said all that, it is better to just remain cautious and bide your time. 2021 can be better if you just avoid mingling with too many people. With respect to the university students, if I may add, because this is really important, is just because you have tested negative, that test is only negative on the day you were tested. And therefore, when you go home, it is important that you are still aware and make sure that you don't develop any signs and symptoms after your test.
OK, well, very good advice from you both, as ever. Thank you so much, Professor Sian Griffiths and Dr. Bharat Pankhania. Thank you for taking our viewers' questions, and thank you to you for sending them in.